Director of Generation Rents. We're pleased to be joined by three expert speakers, and they'll speak in this order. It's Matt Copeland, who's Head of Policy and Public Affairs at National Energy Action, a national charity who are working really hard to fight and end fuel poverty across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Michael Browning, who's the member of the private sector safety team, the leader of that at Oxford City Council. So welcome, Michael. And Fflur Lawton, who's Head of Public Affairs at Smart Energy GB. And they'll all be presenting to you tonight. What I propose that we do is after each presentation, put questions in the Q&A as we go. We might take a few questions after each presentation, but then there'll be time for you to have discussion and comments and questions at the end. Okay, so hopefully without technical issues, we're going to go over to Matt, who's going to start the conversation and hopefully share his screen with you all. And I'm going to go on mute.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be presenting to you today. As Alicia's already said, I'm Matt Copeland, so I'm the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at National Energy Action. Hopefully you can see my slides. I can see some nodding faces, that's really good. Just a bit more about NEA. It's a really good introduction by Alicia there. So we are national fuel poverty charity working across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We work with our sister charity, Energy Action Scotland, to cover the whole of the UK. And we work to improve access to energy and debt advice. So helping people to understand energy and debt a bit better, but also helping people to access the benefits that they are entitled to. We provide training to other organisations so that they can provide that advice as well, but also do things like better identify vulnerability in energy markets. We do the thing that I'm responsible for, which is advocating for policies to help eradicate fuel poverty. So we work with governments and regulators and businesses to make sure that decisions they make are in the interests of fuel poor households. We have a research team that helps me build the evidence to do that. So we do lots of research into the impacts of fuel poverty and the causes of fuel poverty. And we do lots of work in the community as well, running projects and coordinating with other organisations to provide services which can help bring people out of fuel poverty. So you might want to ask the question, so what is fuel poverty? And luckily in the UK, it is a legally defined thing. And its legal definition is basically a person with a lower income living in a home which cannot be kept warm at a reasonable cost. So in sort of lay terms, that is someone who cannot afford to pay their energy bills, largely because they have both low income and high energy costs. But we measure that, so how many people are in fuel poverty, by looking at everyone who has an income below 60% of the median, who also lives in a home with an EPC worse than C. And that's basically a home that is not particularly energy efficient, that's quite leaky in terms of heat. And the reason we measure that like that in England is that we have a target to essentially eliminate fuel poverty by 2030. So if we can upgrade all homes to, or fuel poor homes to have an EPC of C or better, then we have reduced that metric to zero, that measurement to zero, and notionally eliminated fuel poverty, although some people will struggle to heat their homes still. But that's what we're working towards in England, is to make homes more energy efficient. At the moment, we are seeing quite a difficult situation in terms of people who are struggling with their bills, because as everyone on this call would have no doubt seen on the news and in the papers, is that energy prices are soaring. And I wanted to just briefly explain why that's happening. And it's because of increased wholesale gas prices. So the reason that the gas price is so high is basically, there's a lot of technical stuff on this slide, but it's because the supply of gas is lower than it usually is, because we haven't got as much of it in storage, and we're not able to get it from other countries as readily as we might have done previously, and we're using more than we usually would do, mainly because of unseasonably cold weather earlier in the year, in the autumn, and we've had lower than expected wind generation earlier in the year as well, meaning that we are using more gas to heat our homes and using more gas to power our power stations and create electricity. So that increased usage but reduced supply is pushing the gas price up quite a significant amount, and that wholesale price feeds through into our energy bills. So we've already seen energy bills increase this winter, and in April we're expecting a further increase. So for people living at home, all of us, we've seen about a £250 increase in sort of average energy bill compared to last winter, and that's coupled with, for some people, reduced incomes. For those people who are reliant on universal credit, who are not in work, they've had their income decreased by £20 a week recently, and we have higher than usual inflation at the moment. So we have inflation that's quite high at 5%. So the cost of things that aren't energy, for example, food and clothing, water, other essentials, has also increased. So household bills have increased, but household incomes in a lot of cases have reduced. After this winter, we're expecting that prices could rise very, very significantly because of the sustained increase in wholesale price we've seen recently. And that could be £400, £500, £600. Inflation, unfortunately, is also expected to continue because inflation is somewhat reliant on the energy price. Energy prices are high. That tends to mean that things cost more to make, and therefore food and clothing and other such things become more expensive. So we are expecting things to get worse from that perspective as well. Another element of this is that energy suppliers, because of this sustained increase, are finding it quite hard to sustain themselves in the market. And that's for a number of reasons, but those aren't really important. The important things are what it means for householders. And for the majority of people whose supplier goes bust, leaves the market, there is absolutely no problem at all. You get transferred to a new supplier, your credit balance is maintained, you don't really see the difference. You might just see a different name on the letter you get for your bill. For some households, we're seeing some issues. So the debt that, if you have debt with your supplier and they go bust, your debt doesn't transfer to the new supplier, it can go to a different body, their administrator that comes in. And that debt doesn't have the same rules as usual, so that can create problems. We're seeing in some cases that prepayment users can't top up if the infrastructure stops working for a short period of time. And we know that those who have applied for broader group warm home discount payments may not receive them anymore if their supplier goes under. So lots and lots of challenges facing households in the energy market at the moment, and it looks like it's going to continue into the future as well. So quite a bleak picture, but there is support available. And I wanted to run through some of the support that people can access at the moment. I think that's quite useful. So that there's a few things that are national that that's available to a set of households. So the warm home discount is £140 off of your energy bill if you meet certain criteria. So you get it automatically if you're in receipt of the guaranteed element of pension credit, and you are eligible for it if you receive a means tested benefit. So if you receive a working age benefit that you get because of being on low income. If you are in that second group, so a working age, receiving a working age benefit, then you have to apply for the warm home discount to your energy supplier. They may have some additional criteria, such as having a certain disability or a certain health condition that makes you particularly vulnerable to the cold. But it's always worth checking with your supplier whether you're eligible for the warm home discount and seeing if you can apply. Secondly, we have the Household Support Fund, which was the measure that the government announced in the autumn to support people with these rising costs. So this was a £500 million package for the whole of the UK, In England, it was distributed to local authorities, and each local authority has its own sort of criteria for who can access it and exactly what it can go towards, whether it's food vouchers or fuel vouchers or other things like that. But there is support available there, sort of crisis funding to help people meet their energy needs this winter. It won't be enough to go around everyone who needs it, but there is support there for some people to access. It's really important at the moment for people to be on the Priority Services Register, the PSR, not least because of the amount of power cuts we're seeing at the moment. So the PSR is a register of people who have additional needs in that sort of situation. So it might be people who are reliant on medical equipment, people who are particularly vulnerable to the cold, and they will be prioritised when there is a power cut. So although it's taken over a week for everyone to be sort of reinstated into their energy networks over the past week or so, those who needed it the most, those who were registered with the Priority Services Register, would have had priority during that. It's really important, if you should be on that you are in that, and you can contact your energy supplier to find out if you are eligible. And there's a couple of other things as well. There's winter fuel payments, which every person over 66 receives. Don't have to apply for it if they're on pension credit. Do have to apply for it if not. But every over 66-year-old is eligible, and that's a payment of £200 or £300 dependent on your household situation. And additional to that, and not on the screen, are cold weather payments, which are payments that eligible households get if the weather remains cold for a certain number of days. So it's people on working age or people in receipt of means tested benefits, again, that are eligible for cold weather payments. So there's a number of national schemes available to help people this winter. People will still struggle, but there are schemes available. There's locally things available as well. So gas networks, GDNs, gas distribution networks, and DNOs, which is the electricity equivalent, have support schemes available. So it's always worth checking your local energy networks to see if they provide any support this winter. They've been told by the regulator to provide to make sure they're supporting their customers this winter, particularly in terms of addressing financial vulnerability, those people who can't afford to keep warm. So there will be money available from that perspective. And local authorities will have support available beyond the Household Support Fund. Each local authority would like to do their own thing. So again, always worth checking with a local authority to see if they have additional support available too. In addition to that sort of support that's available, NEA's put together an energy checklist for people this winter, just to make sure that people know what to do if they run into difficulties in paying their energy bill. We put this together with Energy UK, which is sort of energy suppliers trade body. So we're really confident these are the right things to do. The number one thing in every situation is contact your energy supplier to see if you're on the cheapest tariff, or to discuss energy debt. Really important in the context of energy debt, because energy suppliers have a duty to make sure your debt repayment plan is suitable for you. It's using the means that is right for you, whether it's direct debit or other means, and the amount you're paying is suitable for the amount that you are able to pay. So that is incredibly important. There are ways you can maximize your income through accessing the benefits you're entitled to, and it's worth contacting Citizens Advice and using other benefits checkers that are available on the internet to see what's available to you. Checking if you can receive any discounts or payments, like the £1 discount that I mentioned earlier. It's really important to see what you're eligible for. Getting that crisis support that I talked about, whether it's from a local authority or a network or some other means. That charities have crisis support at times. It can be worth contacting NEA. If you go to our website, there's ways of contacting us. But there's often crisis support available. Often taking a meter reading is a good thing, because you might be being charged more for energy that you haven't actually used. So making sure that your bills are correct is good. And knowing what to do if your supplier goes out of business, which for the main part is taking a meter reading and not switching. So it makes it much more difficult for you as a household if you switch just after your supplier goes out of business, things can go wrong. So the message is always keep calm, take a meter reading and wait to be contacted. Before I finish my presentation, I was asked to sort of talk quickly about what sort of rights private renters particularly have. And the rights that private renters have mainly are around the energy efficiency of properties. And every privately rented property must be of EPC E or better. There are some exemptions, like if the resident doesn't want improvements to be made, then that property is exempt for a period. Some listed buildings, for example, are exempt, but most privately rented properties have to be EPC E or better, or landlords face fines. And the enforcement of that is done by local authorities, and landlords can be fined if they breach those regulations. But if those regulations are breached, it doesn't affect the validity of any tenancy granted. So if you find that your EPC property you're renting is E and you report it, and it's found there's a breach of regulations, you can't be evicted. Also, you can't be evicted if if you don't have a copy of the EPC as a tenant. So if your landlord, if you think you have a rubbish EPC, and your landlord can't prove that you have a good one, they can't evict you, which is a good thing. So another bit of protection there. And the Deregulation Act 2015 protects against unfair eviction, where a household has raised a legitimate complaint about the condition of the home. And that includes issues about energy efficiency to do with reaching this EPC-E standard. So if you think your home is energy inefficient, it's really worth checking this and seeing if your landlord should be making improvements to the property. And as I said, the local authorities are the ones that enforce this. So always worth checking your local authority pages to see the work that they're doing to enforce those rules. That's it for my slides, but I'll stop sharing. There might be some questions from you guys.
Yeah.
Or I might have to move on. I don't know about time.
No, thanks, Matt. There are some questions, and I think you're right about the support issue at this crucial time being top of everyone's list, because that's largely what the questions are about. So if I just take a couple, Glenys, she says she's on low income. She's sadly battled with cancer twice. Why can't she get help with heating or a hardship payment from the government? And is there anything that you think there might be a help for Glenys? And in similar vein, Bruce asks what financial help is or could there be made available to those on low income and basic benefits in light of rising costs. Now, there may not be more than you've already outlined, but maybe there's something else you can add.
So
I was just going to say the other one, which is about benefit, is in the Q&A, Matt, you can see. So does the changes to the universal credit taper rate affect this in any way, and more people being eligible for warm homes discount? So let's take the benefit, those sort of questions first, low incomes and benefits.
Do you mind if I answer the first question first? I've got a really simple answer. Something I didn't mention earlier is that the warm home discount scheme, in addition to the £140 rebates, has an additional part of it, which funds charities like NEA to help people who don't qualify for the warm home discount but are essentially in need of help. So people with who are at risk of fuel poverty. So for example, the situation that was described there, recovering from cancer or having certain disabilities or other health conditions. So it's worth contacting NEA to see if NEA can help. In that instance, we might be able to help through one of our schemes. In terms of the benefits questions, the changes to the universal credit taper and the overall changes to the universal credit, the difference that makes is that there will be more people with lower incomes overall, because that 20 quid was taken away from universal credit, 20 quid a week that we had during the pandemic. The taper was changed, which helps some people, and on average, working age people will see no difference. But there will be more people than not that lose out as an overall consequence of those changes. It doesn't change the eligibility for the schemes, because the same amount of people will be in a receipt of universal credit essentially, and getting it is the criteria in many situations. But it does impact on the people themselves. in terms of their income. And I think the last question was around what more can we do for people? So NEA have asked if the government could do 4 things. So firstly, to give a bigger household support fund, which I talked about earlier, so more money for local authorities to help people. Secondly, to put more money into the warm home discount so that more people can receive it. So currently 2.2 million people will receive it this year, and we think way more than 3 million people should be able to receive it. Everyone who's eligible should get it, because at the moment there's millions of households who could apply but not get it because there's not enough money to go around. We also think that the winter fuel payments, that £200 or £300 that goes to pensioners, should also go to everyone who's on a means tested benefit. So you could do that quite easily and quite automatically by giving it to everyone who is eligible for cold weather payments. And lastly, we want the government to have a better plan for addressing household debt and helping energy customers who are in debt to repay their bills or repay their debts quickly through a debt matching scheme. So every pound a householder would put in, the government would put in too. So there's a number of things available, and we think that they're all workable as well. And we'll be pushing the government, continue to push the government on those things, especially ahead of the April price increase.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, just changing the subject, Irina asked Matt, would you agree that insulating homes would eliminate fuel poverty?
Certainly in the long term, that's a huge focus for us at NEA. So we've got a policy priority to achieve a fair and affordable transition to net zero, and insulating homes is at the heart of that. That is the best way to alleviate poverty in the long term.
Great. And then similarly, Dan says, who can qualify for grants to upgrade their homes, and how easy is it for renters to get the benefit from that?
So it's largely not renters that can access full grants, right. But local authorities, in some of the money that they've been given, that's separate to the support that I've outlined today. So local authorities have been given £500 million this year to upgrade homes in their areas, and they're allowed to give grants to landlords to upgrade their properties, but landlords have to put in a 2/3 contribution, so they can get 1/3 from local authorities, for 2/3 themselves. Local authorities are all doing it differently. Some will support landlords, some won't, but there is that funding available, and there's more coming in the future as well. So we know the government's committed about £1.1 billion to upgrading off-gas grid homes. So there's money available there, but largely the government is going to be leaning on the private rented sector regulations for minimum energy efficiency standards, where landlords have to put £10,000 in of their own money to get their homes to EPC E currently, and it's likely they'll have to get to EPC C by 2028. Sorry, I got that first figure wrong there. It's £3,500 to EPC E. I'm confusing myself. But landlords have to put money into improved properties.
No, that's great, Matt. Then actually, this is an interesting question. So Joe, water companies often a capped low monthly payment, for example, £9.71 a month, so that everyone can access water. Isn't that something that we should have for gas and electricity, especially obviously if you're on low incomes?
Yeah, I think so. We've had similar stuff before. So before we had the price cap and before we had the warm home discount, in fact, we had social tariffs in the energy sector. Those social tariffs were really sort of diverse between energy suppliers. Some were really good, some weren't very good. So we don't want to see a move back to what we used to call social tariffs, because we didn't think it was a particularly good situation. But warm home discount is very universal. Every supplier offers the same thing. But we do think there's a case building for lower tariffs for the most vulnerable households. And that is something we're exploring with government and the regulator now to see if there's any appetite to do that. And I suspect there will be conversations going forward on what that could look like. And there could be a move towards that in the future. I think that this massive increase in prices we're going to see in April is going to really put the fire up in some bellies.
Okay. And Argo asks, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Obviously, a lot of the support is for those on benefits. What about, if you're on, you have a low income but have a high rent, is there any level of support there?
So there's two areas of support. So we are concerned about those people that have a low income but don't receive assessed benefits. About half of Fflur Lawton households fall into that category in England, even more in Wales. But there are two elements that I've described are available for people who aren't on assessed benefits. Firstly, the household support fund isn't just for people on assessed benefits. So local authorities can decide to give it to people who are more generally on a low income. And the warm home discount scheme, the part of it that charities deliver, isn't just for people on assessed benefits. So there is support available through charities there, and it's worth asking an energy supplier whether there is that support available. Okay.
And Matt, I don't know if you can see the chat, but Rob has asked quite a few questions about an outfit called Energy Angels. Have you ever heard of them? Which is managing energy matters, avoid social housing, supporting a family. And then he goes on to say, I presume that despite climate-based demands to move to electric, not gas, a landlord wanting to take gas, Central Hildon will still be liable to prosecution under building control, Part L. That's quite technical. I don't know if you know that. It's the very last question in the Q&A from Rob.
I don't know the answer to that.
No, okay. Let's see if we can find out for you, Rob. You've foxed us there. And obviously, Joe's made the point there's very little help for those on low incomes of just over 17,000, which I think is the point that you were making. But have you heard of Energy Angels?
Yes. So we've done work with Energy Angels in the past and had at least pre-pandemic, did lots of sort of events alongside Energy Angels. So have known some of the team quite well in the past. But I think it was Lee Fairbrother who's now moved on to other things. Right. It'd be really good to reconnect them. Honest. Right,
great. Lovely, thanks, Matt. So those are the ones that are specific to you, and I think we're Michael was having a couple of technical issues. So Fflur, if it's okay with you, we're going to move to your presentation. So here's Fflur from Smart Energy GB. Thanks, Matt. That was excellent.
Hi, everyone, and brilliant to join you today. Thank you for coming along, and thank you to Generation Rent as well for inviting me along to talk about what is such an important topic, I think, for all of us at the minute. As Alicia mentioned, my name's Fflur Lawton. I'm the head of public affairs for Smart Energy GB. And I don't know how many of you know about us, but we're the National Consumer Engagement Campaign for the smart meter rollout. So that means it's our job to make sure that people are aware of smart meters, of the benefits of smart meters, and that they can confidently say yes to taking up the offer of a smart meter from their energy supplier. We're also tasked with encouraging energy behaviour change as well, and supporting consumers in vulnerable circumstances, including those in fuel poverty, to make sure that they understand smart meter rollout and that they can use their smart meters to help take some control of their energy use. So smart meters are the next generation of gas and electricity meters. They're digital meters, and they're being installed by energy suppliers in homes across Great Britain at no additional cost. So being digital means that they send your meter readings direct to your energy supplier. So the way they do that is there's actually a small box normally connected to your electricity meter, which is called a communications hub. And that's the smart bit of the meter. It talks directly to your energy supplier and it tells them how much gas and electricity you use. So that means no more meter readings, and you get an accurate bill rather than an estimate. And that, as Matt was just saying, is really important in terms of that accurate bill, so you know you're only paying for the energy that you're using. When you get to your smart meter installed as well, you get given what's called an in-home display. So it's a little display, a little screen that shows you as a consumer how much energy you're using in pounds and pence. And that's really important because it makes your energy far more visible. It's very different to, you know, the situation that we've been in with older analog meters, where it's really hard to understand what you're spending your energy on. And that can help you to then see if there are small changes that you can potentially make to help you better manage your energy use, or at least to understand what's using energy in your home as well. And I think with energy prices rising at the minute, that's even more important. I mean, none of us would take our car to the garage and fill up with petrol without knowing how much that's going to cost us. So why are we doing that with our energy at home? So that visibility is really, really important. The other thing to say as well is that smart meters can operate in either credit, like monthly payment, or prepayment mode, sort of token mode as well. And I think that's really important. And smart meters in prepayment mode are really far more convenient than traditional prepayment. You can top up online, you can top up over the phone, or still go to the shop if that's what you want to do. But the funding is there instantly when you're topping up. It's been particularly useful in sort of lockdown time. So if people haven't been able to get out to the shop to top up, you know, they can do it over the phone. Also for energy suppliers as well, in responding to issues that people are having on prepayment, they can respond far more quickly in smart prepayment mode as well. The other thing to say about smart meters is they're also helping to upgrade Britain's energy system. And that's really important, again, when Matt was talking about getting to net zero. Every smart meter that's installed, that really helps our energy suppliers and our distribution networks to have a much better view of what's going on in terms of demand on our system. And that helps us to make better use of renewable types of energy, things like wind and solar, and reducing waste as well on the system. So that's far better than our sort of analog, our traditional meters do that. So that's a really important thing for the future, that every single smart meter connected to the system really helps with as well. So from Smart Energy GB's point of view, from our work, we do a lot of extensive research into consumer attitudes around smart meters. And from that, we know that around 72% of smart meter owners say that they've got a better idea of what they're spending on their energy. They understand things more. And 79% say that they understand what they need to do to save energy around the home as well. Now, our research has also shown that while people who live in private rented accommodation are more likely to want a smart meter, they're actually less likely to get one installed. And I'll get to that a bit later in my presentation as well. So there are more than 25 million smart meters already installed in homes and small businesses in Great Britain. And the rollout has faced some challenges in the past, but these are now being overcome. One of the key areas we get asked about is actually around switching. So to be really clear, whatever type of smart meter you've got or whatever type of meter you've got, you can switch supplier if that's what you want to do. So some of the early smart meters, the first generation smart meters, when they were fitted, they would only speak directly to your individual supplier. So if you switched, that might mean that they'd go back to working in a traditional meter mode. The meters now being installed are second generation meters. And that means that they're connected to the smart meter network and they're able to switch seamlessly between energy supplier, no matter who completed the installation. For those of you who are on first generation meters, like I am, those are currently being moved across to this new system as well. It isn't something that you need to do. It's a wireless fix to this issue that's being put in place. So we're being moved across to the new system so they'll operate like second generation meters as well. And that's happening over the next few years. So in terms of if you want a smart meter and if you want to organise an installation, what you need to do is whoever the named person is on the energy bill should contact the energy supplier and organise a date and time convenient for them. The installation itself takes around 2 hours, and somebody, a responsible person, has to be there during the installation and make sure that the installer's got clear access to the meter cupboard or wherever the meter is stored. As part of that installation process, during that 2 hours, the engineer will need to shut off the gas and electricity for a short period whilst the meters themselves are being replaced. So be warned of that. So if you've got something going on that you can't have the electricity off, just be aware of that. They then take out the traditional meter and they replace it with the smart meter. They're normally a similar size to traditional meters, and they're normally installed in the same place as your original meter was as well. So once they've restored the gas and electricity supply to the property, the engineer will also carry out some basic safety checks, particularly around gas appliances. So they'll have a look around, make sure, and lots of issues have been sort of flagged by checks like this as well. So it's really important to do. The installer should also show you how to use the smart meter, including the in-home display, how to understand and to read that, and also talk about energy efficiency and energy efficiency advice for people. So in terms about the key benefits for people in private rented accommodation and smart meters, and we've already talked about the accurate bill and being able to see in pounds and pence as well what you're spending. But the automatic readings that are sent by the smart meter to the energy supplier also mean that your final bill, so if you're moving out of a property, the final bill at any change of tenancy can be calculated accurately, hopefully preventing disputes. And also where meter readings are sent to the supplier either daily or half hourly, and currently you do get a choice in that how often you want information to go from your meter to your supplier. But if you select daily or half hourly, then the landlord or the letting agent doesn't need to be at the property at the end of a tenancy either to take a meter reading. So you can see that. And from a landlord's point of view, you can also monitor usage during void periods in case something's been left on, or maybe the heating hasn't been left on in cold periods and things like that to keep an eye on things. Smart meters also offer consumers more ways to pay for energy and different tariffs and services as well that are coming up. So as I mentioned, smart meters can switch between prepayment and credit mode over the air at the bill payer's request. So that means that you don't have to have a new meter installed to be able to benefit from prepayment as well. They can also provide access to new tariffs. So there are lots of what we call time of use tariffs that are coming in, looking at different ways of sort of managing supply and demand on the system, but also offering you cheaper energy if you're using energy at different times outside of peak times as well. Again, that's all down to customer choice if you are looking to get tariffs like that as well. In terms of energy efficiency, having that visibility and that understanding of what energy you're using can really help as well. And our research shows that with that sort of extra information, people do make more informed choices about what they're doing in terms of controlling their energy where they can. So we know that over nearly 2/3 of people with smart meters are more conscious of the energy that they use, and that people think twice as well about using high energy appliances. So from a tenant's perspective, some are worried about making changes in rented properties and installing a smart meter as well. And they're a bit worried about what their landlord might think. And we did some research with the behavioural architects to better understand the sort of attitudes of landlords and letting agents towards smart meters as well. And we weren't really sure what to expect from the research, but we were actually far more positive. They were far more positive than we expected. And we asked landlords if they'd agree to a request from a tenant to install a smart meter, and positively 72% of landlords would agree to getting a smart meter. We also sort of asked how many had received a request, how many had rejected one already. So out of 902 landlords, 119 had already received a request for a smart meter, and only 15 had rejected those. And then we asked landlords sort of whether they'd requested a smart meter installation themselves for rented properties, and a quarter of them said that they had. But our research also found that there was a fair bit of confusion about the responsibility for getting a smart meter installed. So 40% of landlords thought that it was their responsibility to install the smart meters, whereas 39% believe it was the responsibility of the tenant. So crucially on this one, if you pay for your energy bills, if your name as a tenant is on those energy bills, it is your decision whether or not to install a smart meter. So Finally, our research found that in some cases, there might be a clause in a tenancy agreement that requires the consent of a landlord before a smart meter is fitted. We've created a letter template that can be downloaded from our website. So if you've got a clause in your tenancy agreement on this, it's worth noting that the energy regulator Ofgem say that your landlord shouldn't unreasonably prevent a smart meter installation. And that's really important at this point as well. So today we've also been doing some PR work with the media around keeping on top of your energy bills. And we've been working with Kate Faulkner and colleagues of Matt's from NEA today as well in asking landlords to help tenants to keep on top of their energy bills. And Kate Faulkner here has come up with 5 sort of top tips in terms of how to keep on top of those energy bills. And no surprises, the number 1 top tip is obviously get a smart meter, because that can really help you. But also check your appliances for eco mode. So for example, depending on the age of your boiler, newer ones will have sort of an eco mode that you can turn on that can help save money as it stops water being preheated. I mean, the downside of that is it does take a little longer for hot water to come out of the tap, but the upside is it can save you money on that. Using LED light bulbs, that can save up to about £40 a year. I was chatting to somebody quite recently who had converted all of the rooms bar one in his house to LED lighting, and that one room was actually using more energy than the rest of the house combined in terms of lighting. The other thing is the potential to talk to your landlord about getting thermostats. So the thermostats on your radiators can help you only heat the rooms that you're using, but keep your house to a good temperature as well for you. And the other thing is around insulation and draft proofing. I don't know about you, but it's blowing a gale, literally blowing a gale outside right now, and I can hear the windows rattling. So if you can feel those drafts coming in, if there are things that you can do to sort of stop those drafts coming into the house, it always makes it warmer for you. So thinking about those, the old-fashioned snakes for doors, I used to call them, you'd put down the bottom of doors and things like that. So simple things that you can do that don't cost money as well to keep your houses warm. So in terms of Smart Energy GB, we've created a dedicated webpage with some resources and information for tenants, landlords and letting agents that does a bit of myth busting around smart meters and answers some of those questions that you might have as well. You can, if you're interested in getting a smart meter, you can request one directly through our website, going straight to your energy supplier. As I said, we've put together sort of a letter template, one to inform your landlord that you're getting a smart meter and one to ask for their consent if you have a clause in your tenancy agreement, to basically to make it as easy as possible for you. And we're here to answer any questions you might have, and we're happy to chat and sort of talk to your organisations if you need something like that as well. And you can see the email address there, inquiries@smartenergygb.org, if you need anything else. Thank you.
That's great, Fleur. Thank you very much. I think you're right about a bit of confusion, because that's the first question that came through actually. So what if my landlord refuses to let me get a smart meter, and what do I do if they just say no?
I mean, it is really difficult. If your name is on the bill, as we say, then it is your right to request a smart meter to be fitted. We do hear various stories about landlords saying no. I think sometimes they're concerned about, whether installing the meter might damage the property or something like that. The installers are there, they're trained to do this, and it shouldn't take up any more room than your traditional meter. As I say, the letters are on the webpage, so that can help you in terms of going to your landlord and asking that. They shouldn't be stopping you. As I say, if your name is on the bill, then it is your right to do that.
Okay. And then Dan says he's thinking of getting a smart meter, but doesn't know how he can cut down any more on the bills that he's got. So what are the biggest changes that you've seen from your research that has been to people's energy use after they've got a smart meter? So what appliances use less? How do they use it?
Yeah, so it can be a real challenge, can't it? I mean, the important thing about the smart meter is that it makes things visible for you. So it helps to explain, because I didn't know before then what was costing me money in my home. And I think that can then lead you to be doing things that maybe aren't that helpful as well. So my hairdresser, for example, I always use her as an example, but she was telling me she'd got into terrible arrears with her bills. And she said, "Oh, it's fine, Fflur, don't worry. I'm not using my heating. I'm just using the electric heater and my hairdryer to keep warm." And I was like, oh, this is probably costing you so much more and isn't healthy and isn't good. What the smart meter allows you to do is actually to see that, is to understand actually what is costing you money and how, you know, how best to use that to keep yourself warm, to keep yourself healthy as well. And it is about that visibility. I've already given the example just of the lights and things like that. There is obviously an outlay in terms of paying for those lights in the first place, but they do make their money back quite quickly. The other thing we talk about again is around those sort of draft proofing, simple things that you can do that don't cost money, that help to keep you warm as well.
Okay, I've got a couple of more. Some may be relevant to Michael, but after his presentation. But the couple on smart meters. So Louise asks. So Louise lives on an estate where all the gas meters have been set into the ground. So, you know, it's not really a smart meter situation, or is it? Is there any way around that?
It is difficult. I mean, definitely talk to your energy supplier, let them know that that's where it is. They do have to find solutions for all sorts of different types of meters. I mean, the housing stock in Britain is really, really varied. So they have had to look at lots of different solutions to make sure that they get smart meters into as many homes as possible. So they will be needing to look at that. It might be something that the gas distribution operators might need to come in and to do something. Ultimately, they will be looking at solutions for it, but it might be slightly further down the line.
And then going back to the landlord. So Rob says, obviously, when you come round and they put it in and it's the cupboard, who pays for the, you know, the changes that may have to happen around the area? Who pays for that?
I mean, it depends on the changes. I've not heard particularly of anybody having to pay for it. If the landlord is requesting you to do something, that is a discussion you need to have with them. Most smart meters will fit into the same place as your meter, so they shouldn't have to be any changes. The issues might come is where, let's say, you know, someone's built a kitchen cabinet in front of their meter or something like that, where things have been built around it, then that can get trickier. And that is a discussion you have to make with your landlord. I mean, basically, people shouldn't be hiding the meters anyway. Even if it's a traditional analog meter, you still need to get to it to get your meter reading. So they shouldn't be building things around it. So you might need to have a discussion if it's in a particularly difficult place. But as I say, most installations happen quite, they just replace like for like and don't have to worry about making amends around it.
Yeah, and Shahina asks, do smart meters track and help with the use of gas?
Yes, so they do both electricity and gas. So the electricity is in near real time, so you can literally turn the kettle on and you can see how much that's costing you within the hour. Gas is slightly slower, so it takes about half an hour, but you can still see that. So what the screen will show you is you can see near real time in terms of electricity, and then you can see sort of how much it's costing you now, how much it's costing you today, this week, this month. You can also look back as well. So in terms of budgeting and thinking about actually how much things are costing you, that's really useful as well. But yeah, you can see electricity and gas on them.
Okay, now Carol and Julia have asked a couple of questions, but I also think, Michael, this might come into your presentation, but because they ask, is it advisable to heat rooms sometimes to stop dance and mold and respiratory problems, which you may touch on, Michael? So bear that in mind when you go through. So just ask Fflur. And if the landlord doesn't want to change old windows and repair to prevent the draft, and entry glass doors are too old, is there anything that they can do? That Lawton one may well fall into your presentation, Michael, but I don't know, Fflur, if you've got anything to
I think I'll defer to Michael on this actually, because they're probably a bit technical for me.
Okay, all right. Finally then, to hear for you, Fflur, I think this is yours. This is the first time we've been in a property with a smart meter installed. I think keeping an eye on the meter is informative. You can see when the energy use is high or low, so you can be in control to some extent. So that's from Tahira. So that's a good note upon which to end your presentation, I think.
That's lovely. Thank you. Good to hear.
Great. Lovely. Well, Michael's back with us, thankfully, which is great. And Michael, as I said, is from the private rented sector team at Oxford City Council. And so, Michael, hopefully your IT will sustain your presentation and the questions. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, I hope so. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Mike Browning. I'm the team manager of the private sector safety team at Oxford City Council, and we're responsible for regulating private sector houses in Oxford City. So we currently have an HMO licensing scheme which can address many of the problems that people have with energy efficiency. I manage the private sector safety team, which is essentially regulating family dwellings. We have a bid for selective licensing, which is going through next year. So we may have a licensing scheme for all private rented properties from next year. But what I wanted to do this evening, if I can just share my screen, is just go through a short presentation about energy standards in the private rented sector. Let's see if it comes up. There we go. Okay. So, as an introduction, I guess the all-important question is why is energy efficiency important? Then I'll go through some example energy performance certificates, or EPCs, and a breakdown of energy performance certificates, what the certificate should tell you in layman's terms. Then I'll go through briefly minimum energy efficiency standards and the exemptions. I know that I think it was Matt that went through some of this stuff. He touched on that, so there will be some doubling up on that. But I'll go through some of the exemptions, what you can do if you're living in a house that's not energy efficient, or if you're moving house or you know somebody. I think the important thing to bear in mind in the context is not just from a personal point of view. Do you know people who are living in a cold home? Excuse me, family and friends who might be living in a cold home. And further down the line, if you're looking either now looking to move house, you're looking to rent another property, or whether in 6 months or a year's time you're looking at renting a property. These are all things that that you might find useful. So then I'll just touch on local authority powers. So as regulators, what we can do. And then the final slide will give you some useful links and contacts. So it's a very complicated thing is energy efficiency. But the reason that it's important, of course, is that it improves the level of comfort in your home. Cold homes are linked with health issues. So persons over the age of 65 are generally classed, for our purposes, as the vulnerable age group. However, anybody with an underlying health issue may have, it may be a problem if you live in a cold home. And cold homes can often lead to damp and mold problems. So if you can't heat your house, or if your house is poorly insulated, then damp and quite often lifestyle will contribute to that. So for example, if you're cooking or you're bathing, hopefully not at the same time, if you're drying clothes on the radiator, then all these will add vapor into the air, and warmer air obviously can hold more vapor, and what will happen is it will condense onto cooler surfaces, and then that's when that creates prime conditions for mold growth. And of course, energy efficient homes save money on fuel bills, which the previous presenters have touched on there. So the more energy efficient your house is, the better insulated it is, and the more efficient your heating system is, the less you'll spend on fuel bills. And then of course, energy efficiency, it reduces carbon emissions from your home. Many years ago, when I started my role, the emphasis was on health, which is of course important. But I think going forward, government legislation is likely to be driven by climate change. I suppose either way you look at it, whether it's through health or through climate change, the better a house is insulated and the more efficient the heating system is, the more everybody benefits. So, so energy performance certificates. So I don't know if people are familiar with these. A little bit like the electrical rating systems. If you buy an appliance from you know, whether it's a fridge or a vacuum cleaner. So what we have is a very poor energy EPC, the top one, with a G rating. And we are still encountering these types of properties through to an energy performance certificate with a very good. They've attained a B, and these are genuine. Obviously, I've not put the addresses in, but these are genuine energy performance certificates. So obviously, the nearer you get, the higher you get, the better performing your house will be. And what we find is that this is a useful indication at a glance that you can see how energy efficient that your property will be. Now, what your landlord should do at the start of every tenancy, they should be providing you with an EPC certificate, and that should give you the opportunity to make a decision perhaps on whether you want to rent that property. I know it's not always easy. Sometimes if the circumstances don't dictate you, that you don't have the opportunity to do that. But our advice would always be, before you move in, or it may be even before you go to view the property, is to just have a look and see what the energy performance rating is, because you know that the worse performing it is, the higher your fuel bills are likely to be, and the better it is, the more money that you'll save. So the other thing that the EPC will provide is a breakdown of the elements, each element of the construction, and even if you don't understand thermal transmittance in watts per meter squared Kelvin, the rating on the right there will determine whether or not the performance of the building is very good, or whether it's very poor. So I've just used an example here where the thermal transmittance, or the heat loss from the house, is either very good or good. If, for example, walls, floors, and windows are very poor, then you know that you're going to lose whatever heat input you're putting into the property, that you're going to lose it very, very quickly. So this will just give you an idea of what the energy performance certificate will tell you. So there's a number of, or there's a raft of legislative measures that the government have put into place over the years. One of the more recent ones is the minimum energy efficiency standards. And I know Matt touched on this in his presentation. Now, what it means for people renting properties, that any premises that is rated F or G, it shouldn't be rented unless the property is exempt. There are a number of exemptions that a landlord can apply for, and one of these is the spend cap, which landlords are allowed, so that they're permitted to spend a maximum of £3,500, sorry, on energy efficiency measures on their property. Now, if for example the property, if it can't be improved, then the landlord can apply for an exemption, and therefore not necessarily have to raise standards in terms of energy efficiency. So other things about the EPC, so it must be no more than 10 years old, which is quite a long time. However, what we advise landlords, if they've done energy efficiency works in the intervening period, so if they've had an EPC for 5 years, if they've spent a lot of money or refurbished a property, then it's beneficial. There's no legal requirement for them to renew their EPC, but obviously for the purposes of people being able to see what works have been carried out, and the fact that it only costs about £70 for a landlord to get an energy performance certificate, that they renew the EPC within that 10-year period. But that's up to the individual landlord. So, as Matt mentioned in his presentation, a landlord can also have a valid Section 21 notice to end an assured short-hold tenancy, which is quite an important aspect here. If at the start of a tenancy the landlord hasn't provided you with 3 prerequisite pieces of information, so that should be the energy performance certificate, gas safety certificate if gas is provided at the property, and a how to rent guide, which is downloadable from the government website. Now, these are 3 prerequisite pieces of information that a landlord must give you at the start of the tenancy. And if he doesn't provide you with those pieces of information, then a Section 21 notice, if it goes to court, will be invalid. Obviously, the courts will need to know that this is the case beforehand. And the restriction applies to a short-arm tenancies granted in England on or after the 1st of October 2015. So there are other regulations if you're a long-term tenant, if you've been in your property for longer than that. So as I mentioned, the exemptions. If landlords have undertaken improvements that are cost-effective but remain below an EPC, so if they've spent their £3,500, they can't get it any higher than that, then they can apply for an exemption. Landlords are unable to install improvements that are cost-effective without upfront costs. Necessary third-party permissions. So this is where, if a tenant can refuse. I'm not sure why a tenant would refuse to have energy efficiency works installed in their property, but tenants do have the right to do that. So if the tenant withholds consent from doing that, and then listed buildings, so they can also be exempt in certain circumstances. This is the MEES regulations are a very complex piece of legislation, and for that purpose, and I'll move on to that in a couple of slides. We have another piece of legislation that we can use, which we find as a local authority gives us far more effective results, and I'll move on to that in the next couple of slides. So what you can do as a tenant, and again, as I mentioned before, don't think of this as from your own personal perspective. If other people are moving, or if they're in a house that is cold, then obviously it's applicable to all circumstances. So what you can do is you can check to ensure the property you're looking at to rent has an EPC. So that's the most important thing. Does it have an energy performance certificate? The higher the EPC rating, the more energy efficient the property will be. Avoid properties being advertised without an EPC. I think what we generally find is if a landlord is renting a property that doesn't have an energy performance certificate, then there's likely to be other things that are missing too. So things like gas safety certificates, electrical safety certificates. So if someone hasn't bothered to get an EPC, then there's likely other things that they haven't bothered to get either. So and as I mentioned before, the landlord or agent should provide a copy of the EPC at the start of the tenancy. And for existing tenancies, so if you didn't check your EPC before you moved into your property, you can check the EPC register to see if your property has an EPC, and the website for that is gov.uk, and that's in the links at the end of the presentation. So so you can see where you can check to see if your property has an EPC. You can also make a request in writing to your landlord if you want energy improvements carried out. So again, this is quite a complex thing, and the link is there for people who may, if you're signed up to a long-term agreement and you might want to fund yourself. This does happen, or you apply for grant. There was some grant mentioned in Matt's presentation. And a landlord must not unreasonably refuse consent to an energy efficiency improvement if requested by the tenant. And I think importantly, if you do live in a property where you've got drafty windows, drafty doors, your heating system isn't effective, in the first instance, you should speak to your landlord and try and get them to make those improvements. Now, if your requests fall on deaf ears, then you can come to the local authority. And the powers that we have is that we can require a landlord to provide an EPC for houses let as HMOs or as family dwellings. There are some restrictions around HMOs, but however, a lot of them will still have to comply with the regulations. What we will do is, if it's an HMO and it's a licensable HMO, it will be subject to periodic inspections. For family dwellings, we're more reliant on people coming forward to us if their landlord hasn't made repairs, or they, it's fallen on deaf ears, then people can complain to the local authority, and we can investigate. And what we will do is, in pretty much most circumstances, is we will carry out a whole house inspection of the property, and we won't only look at excess cold, we'll look at other issues as well, other items of disrepair. What we can do is, once if we believe that a situation is severe, then we can serve an improvement notice, or for an HMO, we can attach licence conditions to require energy efficiency improvements to be carried out. If improvements are not implemented within a certain timescale, then we can take enforcement action for both tenures, non-HMOs and HMOs. And for certain circumstances, we can now issue financial penalties on landlords as well. And of course, we can also, although we are predominantly an enforcement team, we can advise tenants and landlords on energy saving and improvement works. So, local authority powers, we find more effectively we can use at what we call our Part 1 powers, which is under the Housing Act 2004. This came into force in 2006, but it's still a relevant piece of legislation, and we can assess a property for energy efficiency, and we can serve an improvement notice if it's appropriate to do so, and we can require landlords or agents to improve energy efficiency without the £3,500 cap. So if we deem that certain works are required within a property, then we can serve a notice and require a landlord to make those improvements, irrespective of cost. We can also address other safety problems that may exist at the property, for example, fire safety, gas safety, which are also very important. And we can pursue legal action or issue a financial penalty for non-compliance. And that's the end. There's some links there. I'm assuming this presentation will be distributed to everybody, so people will have a copy of this. So
yeah.
Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen.
No, thank you, Mike.
Okay.
No, that's very, very useful. And as you can imagine, there's lots of questions. So I'm going to start with the sort of general advice before we move on to the specifics. So questions come in from Grace, so and on social media. So when you report damp and mold, you're normally told by your landlord to put in place things like open a window, don't dry your clothes, keep the lid on your pans, and somehow the mold is your fault. So what advice have you got for tenants in these situations to help? What can you do as a tenant to ensure the landlord takes this more seriously? And is there any advice that you can give tenants in that situation? Okay.
So yeah, anybody living in a house, because we all create vapor, whether it's through cooking, washing, drying clothes, just the simple act of breathing. We're constantly producing vapor, and if the conditions are right and it's allowed to settle onto cold surfaces, and it will condense onto cold surfaces, then mold will grow. So obviously, common sense. It's about keeping the temperature of the property, keeping it as warm as you can, and ventilation. So if the landlord chooses to do that, then that is fair advice. However, we need to look at the intrinsic value of or the intrinsic reasons as to why. What is actually causing the damp? So if it's a poorly insulated element of the structure, or if it's the heating if you're not able to heat the property effectively, then those will all be contributing factors. So it's really a fine balance between the amount of moisture that you create within the property against the insulative qualities of the fabric of the building and the heat input that you put into the building.
And Mike, someone's asked, which is a follow-up to that, is the landlord supposed to use different oil paint for the bathroom to prevent damp and mold, and different for the kitchen, or different to the rest of the rooms.
Different paints, was that? Sorry.
Different paint. Sorry, yeah. Sorry, my
Yeah.
Paint.
I think painting over something isn't really a solution, because all that will happen is that mold will come back. You have to identify the reasons why the mold is, and it is often bay windows, or corners, behind beds, behind cupboards and that sort of thing. Though it's where it tends to be where you get less air circulation, that condensation will settle and will provide the ultimate conditions where mold can grow. So whereas some paints you can buy antifungal paints and that sort of thing, in some circumstances painting it might work. But I think what you have to look at is, for example, if you've got an uninsulated loft space, so there's no insulation at all in the loft, then condensation and mold will repeatedly, you can wash it and paint it as often as you like, but in colder weather, it will come back. So the solution is to insulate the loft. You might want to look at adding additional insulation over bathrooms, because you're looking at rooms which are producing excessive moisture, and therefore you need additional insulative qualities within that property, or a better heat input to maintain the temperature before, and with the, again, going back to the open window, because obviously you do need an air change to change that air. But does that answer that one?
Yeah, well, that was Susan's question. I don't know if you saw it in the chat, and obviously it's something that happens a lot, is the landlord hid the mold before they moved in by painting over it.
Yeah.
And that's made her ill. It's been damp all year. Obviously, it's too expensive to heat.
Yeah.
Now, there's two issues. Susan's obviously, there's still Section 21, so a couple of people in the chat have put, obviously that's an issue that's stopping them complain. I think Susan's in that position. So a comment on that. But then if Susan wanted to complain, what would she do?
Okay. I think in the first instance, we would always advise that you give your landlord the opportunity to make repairs. So if you've already gone through that process and they're just saying, oh, paint over it, quite often they will just paint, they'll paint a room. And I suppose that's why I say it's important that you check the energy performance certificate when and it's easy for me to say that, I know, but it's advice that we give, because if you can see that a roof or a wall, or if it's, say, for example, single glazed timber sash windows, that they're not going to be energy efficient. Plastic UPVC, I know, not particularly, the production of those isn't particularly environmentally friendly, but they will be better, they will be more energy efficient. And I think that if your landlord has ignored your requests, then you can come to the local authority. Right. We will treat all complaints, or what we term service requests, people coming to us for advice or for us to visit the property. We'll always treat those inquiries confidentially. So in the first instance, if somebody was to email us or to ring us, we wouldn't necessarily contact the landlord. We'd discuss with them what the problems were, what they wanted us to do, and then we would kind of move forward from that starting point. We can carry out advisory visits. We can visit. We don't. There's no restriction on landlords, us having to tell landlords that we're going to visit. Our powers are such that we can go in and inspect, and we can advise, and then we can talk to the tenant, because we do understand that if retaliatory eviction is something that the government have said they're going to bring in measures to prevent that. I think there are some unscrupulous landlords that will try and circumvent any kind of legislative framework. We know that, and obviously, it's a case of, well, we'll apply the legislation where we can, and if a landlord is trying to outwit people, then we'll take them to task on that. But I think the first thing is, if you're living in a house that's cold, damp, etc., then, and your landlord's refusing to take action, then contact the local authority. If you live in Oxford, obviously it's Oxford City I don't know where the people in this webinar are from. Obviously, if you're out of area, then it would be your own local authority, but they should all have an environmental health department or officers who will be able to deal with that sort of thing. Regarding the Section 21, we have a tenancy relations officer who's an expert in landlord-tenant law. So we will always refer people to our tenancy relations officer. And again, it will depend on what your where you are in your contract. If you move into a house, say today, and you find that the heating doesn't work properly, or that you can't heat the house, and then you look at the EPC and you see that it's not well insulated, you're at the start of your tenancy. A landlord can't just simply kick you out at the start of your tenancy, because obviously if you've signed up to a 12-month agreement, if there's a break clause in there, then obviously they can they can issue proceedings after 6 months. But you'll have that element of security. And I know Matt mentioned earlier on the last slide of his presentation that you can have protection from eviction for a period of time. And so just to expand on that, if a local authority serve an improvement notice on a property, then the landlord can't serve a valid Section 21 notice for a period of 6 months. So it only gives you a 6-month security of tenure anyway, but it's something. And I think one of the other things that we find is that quite often, by the time we get notified, the landlord-tenant relationship has already broken down to a degree, and it's quite difficult for us to get to kind of, obviously we're not a mediation service, but it is difficult to kind of get things back on track once that, there's always that element of a tenant not getting on with their landlord. There's always a certain element of animosity because they're paying rent and the landlord's doing nothing. But we're trying to override that, and using the legislative framework that we have, we can take action and get improvements carried out.
Great, thanks, Mike. Carol asks, have you got any tips with asking landlords to improve properties, especially older solid brick, no insulation? Wall insulation is normally more than £3,500.
Yeah, it's hard to heat properties. Solid wall construction, I suppose it depends on, quite often it depends on, if it's a terrace property, a Victorian terrace, there's plenty of those in Oxford, then, you've only got two elements of the wall that are external. They're quite often much easier to treat, because your two side walls, if you're a mid terrace, they're party walls, so your heat loss will be in equilibrium. If you're in a detached property, then obviously they're much harder to heat. But there are measures that landlords can take, because solid walls, they can be insulated externally with a render, or they're done internally. I think it's very difficult to kind of to come up with a generic answer to this, because we always deal with things on a case by case basis. So we look at the property as a whole. Quite often, what we can do is if we look at the quick, not necessarily quick fix, but the easier things like obviously, I think one of the first things we look at when we look at the property is the heat input. So obviously there has to be a gas safe certificate or an electrical safe certificate. Electrical heating has got better over the years, but gas is still still the cheaper way of heating your home. But then, so if we're looking at the heat input, then from that we can then look at the insulation. If you carry out things like draft proofing, loft insulation, and things that are probably less expensive for the landlord, you quite often find they make a significant difference to the overall heat loss of the property. So solid walls, yeah, they're classified as hard to treat dwellings, but we'd look at each one on its own merits.
Right, and I know obviously we've referenced that it's hard to heat a home now with energy prices. Yeah. Is it advisable to heat rooms sometimes to stop damp and mold and respiratory problems?
If you're not using it, It's kind of horses for courses, really, because if you're not using it, do you really need to heat it?
Yeah.
But then you shouldn't really allow a room's temperature to drop too much, because then the fabric of the dwelling of that particular room will drop even further. So I think, as a general piece of advice, background heat is always good. If you've got thermostatic radiator valves, then maybe just have a bit of background heat on there. But if it really depends on all the rooms that you're living in. So your living room, your bedrooms, certainly your bathroom, they should all be heated. But if you've got a spare room or a dining room, or or a room that you're not using, then you probably, if the door's shut, there's no vapor there's no moisture input, so it will still get cold. But unless moisture gets in there, there shouldn't be a problem with condensation. If somehow there is, then you might want to look at just opening the trickle vents on the windows and just keeping a background heat on it. So it's not costing you too much, but you're keeping that room, you're keeping it warm.
Okay. And Mike, obviously with high energy prices, if you've got, drafts and windows need repairing, and you can see your money, like flowing out the windows, but your landlord's not interested in changing any of that, is there anything you can do?
Again, we can, through our enforcement measures, we can, if a window's in disrepair and it's drafty, we'd look at it from two viewpoints. Firstly, the disrepair, which we can address, so that we can require the landlord to overhaul the windows, and then we'd look at the same time, we'd put a stipulation in the schedule to say that you should draft proof, or if we'll usually give a landlord a choice, because sometimes the wholesale of replacing windows isn't always a good thing. Plus, if it's a listed building or if it's in a conservation area, we have to think of planning restrictions and that sort of thing. So there's quite often, a bit of sort of leeway that we have to give. But we shouldn't really leave a house that without either draft proofing it or installing secondary glazing, which is a good alternative to double glazing.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. So
there's loads. They're stacking up there, aren't
there? There is loads, but there's a sort of theme at the end of the chat, and that's obviously Oxford City's great, clearly, Mike, because they've got you. But what if the council is ignoring
I don't know.
you?
A lot of people wouldn't agree with you, but
what if you can't get anywhere with the local authority and they just, don't pay attention to the complaint that you're making?
I like to think that we don't do that.
Okay.
That there are. I don't know. It's always if somebody comes to us, we will always look at the request, speak to the person, and if people have a genuine reason, if you're living in a house that's got an EPC rating of B, then clearly it's well insulated. But again, so there'll be very little. We certainly couldn't improve the EPC, because even new build houses don't get A ratings unless it's I think some properties in sort of these new eco villages that they're building around the country attain an A, but that's because they've got water recovery systems, solar panels, and that sort of thing. So unless you do that kind of work, you're really only going to attain maximum a B, I would say, at present. I mean, obviously technology, as it moves forward, houses will get better, but I think that it's if somebody does have a house they're renting where we can't raise the level of the EPC, then obviously we'd look at it. Could be the boiler's broken down or something, in which case the landlord has a legal duty to repair it. So if anybody comes to us with issues, whether it's excess cold, which is how we would term it, or damp and mold problems, we would always investigate it thoroughly. And sometimes there isn't a lot we could do. That's just life, I'm afraid. But if you've got an EPC that's below an F or G, we can look at it through MEES. We can look at it through our Part 1 functions under the Housing Act, and we can take appropriate action.
And is that the Fitness for Human Habitation Act? Is that what you would use for that?
That's a later thing. That's something that tenants can. I haven't kind of touched on that because I've tried to sort of. I know I've mentioned gas safety and other bits and pieces, but I think the Fitness for Human Habitation Act regulations rather that encompasses. It will include aspects of energy efficiency, but it will be other elements of disrepair to the property, and we can provide a link to that. Again, it's a complex legislation that the government seems to bring out these days. It seems to be more and more complex and difficult to kind of even for professionals to grasp. But yeah, the Fitness for Habitation, it's out there, and we'd be more than happy to to see if we can help tenants if to use that, and if not, because more people helping themselves, right? If you want to come to the local authority, come to the local authority, but if you want to help yourselves, then that's also another option.
Okay, so we're at 7:30. Tilly's posted, thanks Mike, that was fantastic, and Tilly's posted a poll up, so if people have a chance to answer that poll, that would be really helpful to us to work out how we're reaching people. Rob's asked about saving the chat, which I think that you can do, but we will save all of the chat and the questions, and so we'll be able to send it to you, Rob. And I think I just finally want to say a big thank you to Matt, Fflur and Mike. There's been so much information there. I know it's my job, but I've learned a lot today, so thank you, and thank you for putting up with my sniffles and my cold and cough. But yeah, they were excellent presentations, and we obviously, this webinar will remain on our website and on YouTube, so people can view it. And anyone who wants the slides that without watching the webinar, we can send them round. I know we've got copies of all your slides. So I just want to thank my own team, Tilly, Sophie and Dan, for putting this together, and for all of you for joining and sticking with us on this cold night. And thanks ever so much. And don't forget, you can follow Generation Rent on Twitter, on Facebook, and obviously you can get us online at our website. So sign up if you haven't already. All right, thank you very much. Night.